For today's critical thought, this is going to be kind of a continuation of my thoughts from the post I mentioned yesterday, and how much AAA game development has really fallen on hard times, why that's really good and really depressing for any development, and what it can mean for what's going to be happening for the rest of this decade. It's been both interesting and depressing to look at kind of how the game industry has changed over the years through my various deep dive books and the different genres. And a big aspect of this change has been kind of the institution of what AAA game development meant and where it is today. If you missed some of the horrible news that has happened over the past few weeks, we've had, of course, Sony killing physical media, the Microsoft massive layoffs and studio closings, and just the gutting of id Software. And the id one, as I said, really just hurts to hear about this news, as they were one of the last kind of old school studios still kind of in relevance today. And while of course Nintendo and Capcom are still reasonably well, it definitely has been just a very hard time over this past decade to watch the rest of AAA development. Either studios just closing, being stuck working on the same games, live service, and so on. And it really, I think, shows a stark difference between how much AAA development has changed from the late 90s, early 2000s throughout the 2010s. When I started doing Game Wisdom back in 2012, which seems like about 75 years ago, AAA development was really at its peak. This was still this period where working at a major studio like Blizzard, or Square Enix, or Capcom, and so on, was considered the highest watermark, the highest prestige of being a developer. And again, it may be funny for kids and people getting into game development now to realize this, but 15-20 years ago, Blizzard and even studios along lines like BioWare, Capcom, Konami, and so on were considered some of the highest and most prestigious companies. There was this period where basically the country shut down when Blizzard released a new World of Warcraft expansion. And even just the release of World of Warcraft was just this monumental moment for game dev. And now today, all we get out of them is either Overwatch or Diablo expansion. And of course the occasional Hearthstone stuff. But this is a very far cry away from Blizzard at its peak, or any AAA studio at their peak. And it really does show how much things have changed. And part of this again has been how much indie development has really changed the conversation of what it means to be successful in game dev. Like we talked about, in the 2010s, the kind of what became the route that a lot of people talked about was learn how to make games, make a few mods, maybe make an indie project, get hired by a AA AAA studio, become a big name developer in that place, and that was supposed to be kind of your trajectory as a game development. What we saw, however, were a lot of the people who did just that go from indie to AAA found that they hated working at AAA studios and went right back to indie. And then what we see now, and especially again since the beginning of the 2020s, was for a lot of indie studios, they do not care about AAA. A lot of the indie developers I've spoken with, they have no aspirations to work at a major company. And who can blame them? When you look at every other week these days, a major studio falling on hard times, being closed, massive gutting and firings, or just watching a major studio just make the umpteenth Call of Duty expansion, or Call of Duty game, or Fortnite, lots and lots of Fortnite. And it has been a very long time since we legitimately have seen something new out of the AAA space. Which, when we think about the last times I could think of that something got really exciting out of AAA was the reveal of Resident Evil 7, and of course, after everyone played Doom 2016. which again corresponds with Capcom and id Software respectively. Capcom, as I said a few minutes ago, is probably the only studio, at least for this present moment, again, who knows what the rest of 2026 is going to bring, that has really seen this revival. With the success, again, of the Resident Evil games, Pragmata, what we're probably going to get with Resident Evil was a Code Veronicas remake, and of course Resident Evil 9 last year, which I still need to get to and play at some point. But even in this respect, we really still haven't seen anything like massive out of the rest of AAA. And with its firing restructuring, and even with the news that they're not going to be allowed to use their id Tech engine anymore, which that is just horrible to hear, who knows what we're going to be seeing out of the AAA space when it comes to FPS design. Other than, again, your infinitely umpteenth Call of Duty sequel or expansion there. But what this really means for the rest of the industry is that it does show, I think, how much the AAA space has declined in terms of relevancy and what you can expect out of it. As we've talked about, the advantages that AAA has had for the longest time has been the level of refinement and polish that they can bring to any genre. All the hands, energy, and money then go into making a shooter, an action game, a platformer, a battle royale game, and so on. But what we've seen from the consumer base is that a lot of people are getting just outright tired of live service. The, once again, notion of, hey, do you want to play the same game for 6 to 8 hours every single day for the rest of your life? Has kind of declined. Even I've been starting to feel like I'm getting really tired of the live service design. And what we've been seeing in terms of the games that have kind of captured the attention of people have been those indie projects. We had that Chameleon game from a few weeks ago. What was it? Lethal Company from a few years even prior to that. Blueprints, Balatro, Buckshot Roulette. Even in the movie side, with the whole Backrooms movie that has really gone popular these days. But the idea that you can only get quality from a AAA studio has pretty much disappeared in the past 5 to 6 years. With more and more developers, or I should say more and more consumers, just being very tired of playing the same game. And there will always be people who will just play the Call of Duties, the Maddens, the Fortnites, and that level. But for the rest of the audience, they want new experiences. And as I said in the little article that I wrote yesterday, that for a lot of people, you'll hear again that this is the best time to become an indie developer. Right now, every indie developer who just heard that just got a horrible pain in their chest anytime someone utters those words, because it is not a good time for indie development. Even though there's been amazing indie games released, and again, a lot of the ones that I've mentioned already blew up massively, it's still a very hard market to get into. There are, again, lots and lots of games being released. You should know we've tried to cover a small amount of the dozens, if not hundreds, that come out each and every week. And for every game, like a Blueprints, like a Buckshot Roulette, and so on, there are countless more that never get mentioned, or get even close to that success. And for developers to be able to work and do these amazing games, they need the safety net of income coming in. And that was the purpose of publishers, to provide funding and support for a lot of these studios. But when even the indie publishers are having trouble funding or wanting to fund these games, it leads to a market that can feel very homogenized. And for developers who do break out, who have that lightning in a bottle, 1 in a million super amazing game, you can't commercialize that, you can't commoditize that. There is no perfect formula for game dev. Just as someone can say, just do this and this and this and you'll succeed, there'll be someone who will do the opposite of all that and have a massive success, which will then cause everyone to try and repeat that which will then lead to yet another cycle of games being released. But for the industry to be healthy, people need job security. They need to know that when they wake up in the morning that they still have income coming to them at the end of the day, or having financial support from a publisher. Because if you can't do that, then it means that you need to get money from outside sources. And for a lot of indie developers, that is of course doing part-time and full-time work, with your game dev being a side project. Which, there is nothing wrong with that. But if you're expecting an industry where every few weeks you're going to find another amazing game to be released, that is not going to happen. And 2026 has been noticeably smaller in terms of major games being released and major critical and commercial successes. Again, we will have those games that will come out of nowhere and surprise everyone. But it feels like it's only going to get worse for the rest of this decade. We don't know right now what will be the next big name game from id. Will they have another big name game? For a lot of the major studios or formal major studios that we've talked about, what will they have coming out in the next few years? And what horrible news is going to shock the game industry in the next few weeks that will probably make this video be very dated by that time? One final point that, again, to add more depression on top of depression, but there really has been just this outright falling out of AAA meaning something when it comes to games and to game development. Again, people will of course be jumping and chomping at the bit to play a game from Ubisoft, and again, the aforementioned Grand Theft Auto 6. But there really doesn't seem to be that level of prestige, or even that level of wanting to get into the AAA space. As we've talked about, 15-20 years ago, AAA was akin to going to Hollywood. When I first doing my presentations about getting to game dev, I was targeting towards like teens and young adults. I talked about how there were, at least at that time, two distinct career paths you had for games. Do you go work at a major company to learn skills, to build your reputation and your resume? Or do you go indie and go very experimental, do whatever you want but not have that safety net? But today, there really isn't much to say about going to work at a AAA studio, when you have again this threat of closure at any given point, when AAA games are just making the same thing or remaking the same thing again and again. And there just doesn't seem to be that same level of prestige that has gone into it. And here's just one of the many depressing questions for this video. If you are a student, or even just like a first or like early game developer watching this, do you have any interest at going to work for a major studio? Even if there is job security, or even just the promise of job security, do you want to work at a major studio these days? Because from what I've seen from a lot of newer developers, that answer is no. But to wrap things up for our video, the game industry as a whole, as this monolithic entity, is more than likely not going to crash. There is still lots and lots of money going in. But what we will probably see, what we are seeing, is just a massive downsizing and kind of curtailing of going outside the box. Why should a studio try and make a new original game when Call of Duty exists? Why don't you just make Call of Duty? Why don't you just do a Fortnite? Or, as we're seeing with the big name or the big buzz around Grand Theft Auto 6, what will be kind of the game after that? And that is a very, I think, poignant and kind of important question to end this video on. A lot of people have been talking and musing over Grand Theft Auto 6 being kind of the final AAA game. The last game that is going to be afforded the luxury of having lots and lots and lots of time to cook. And will we ever see another game, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, get that same luxury? I don't know. And I don't think we will. And again, while we will still be enjoying our smaller indie games, and games made with worse graphics and people hopefully getting paid more to do them, it's still not going to be a really great time if you're just watching the major studios. And for those of you who are enjoying the doom and gloom of today's video, what Nostradamus prediction do you have about something horrible that will happen in game dev in the rest of this year? Let me know about that one down below. But with that, thanks for tuning in. Maybe next week we'll have some happier news to go over for our critical thought. But until then, have a great rest of your night. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.